without having to use any reserves. And I think that's the $3 million number. I think once we start pulling back some of the things that maybe we want to do, but just plug the structural gap, we get a little bit closer to 2. And I think the bare minimum number, if I were to throw one out there today, would be somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 million, because we have to factor in 1.5 million of that is just the anticipated loss of future cannabis revenue. And Doug and I have had some conversations about this in terms of, we know where host agreements are going, but we also have to think about where excise tax is going. And the markets...
The last one.
The last one was between 1.5 and 1.8. That is sort of what I think is the worst case scenario that's needed, that covers the loss of cannabis revenue today, but limits our exposure in terms of having to rely on reserves that we could slowly...
Say again, I know I've said this to you before, but the revenue loss with the cannabis, 1,500,
1.5 million.
1.5 million, excuse me. That was something that went on the planning board. The primary reason I remember voting for that and moving that project forward was for that financial gain that they were going to be. And I think there's a real political bait and switch at the state level, and it's another example to me of the state is not doing the town's justice. And I just want to mention that, because that 1.5 million is a lot.
It is, and I think it is the most egregious stab in the back to cities and towns. And the reason why I say that is, we can have an argument about whether you thought it was fair or not, but you should have entered into the agreement if that's what you thought. And I'm coming at this from a completely outside perspective. I wasn't in Georgetown at the time. I didn't support the legalization of cannabis, partially because I just never thought, I had always thought this was going to be the day. I mean, we had seen what some of this was doing in California already. The market got saturated. And if you do not hold a hard line in terms of what should happen, we got exactly what we didn't want. But everybody who voted against it sort of said, there's a possibility this could happen. And so at the end of the day, it's very simple. You look at how much of that cannabis money went into political action committees to get the law changed, and it's going right back into what will eventually be a number of publicly traded companies that, when this whole thing gets federalized and the banking restrictions get lifted, there's going to be some people who get really rich.
And I guess a point to make around that is that, as we are all struggling in this town, as everyone is across the country with their towns and their budgets, these problems go beyond the towns and their budgets, and it goes up the ladder. And so hopefully when we're discussing and debating and disagreeing, agreeing, we will also somehow find time between lunch breaks and making sandwiches for kids to somehow contact the state and get involved at the state level as well, because that's where a lot of this lies.
Well, Rob, you were on the planning board, I wasn't here, but there's obviously a part of me that says, if the town knew today what it knew then, would it have even approved the zoning for it? No. What was, no. And that's the part.
We talked about it. Right. We talked about it.
And that's the part I always talk to the state about. I said, you waited till we gave you what you wanted, and you started paying for a little while, and then you took it away from everybody. That I find is the unfair part. And
they have the money. They have the money. But I diverge. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the school funding is super fair and equitable either.
Stop smoking or drinking or whatever cannabis product, gummies, whatever it is. They're all selling. What's happened is the dispensaries themselves, I think, are making less because there are so many players in the marketplace.
Sure.
And that is what's causing the panic. And, you know, to me, that was somewhat of a flaw in how many licenses were allowed to be issued. I mean, we didn't allow that many casino licenses to be issued for that reason.
This might be a good segue into if you can maybe fill us in on your discussions with Reps Mira and Kastner and kind of what they